Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to bring you my Dragonflight Season 2 tier list. With this, we're going to talk about, first, what worked in Season 1, then which of the healers I think is going to really thrive in Season 2. It's always important to note that regardless of where you see healers placed on a tier list, the actual math and performance and statistical analysis that sites like Subcreation do have shown Holy Priest and Mistweaver in Season 1, where they struggled and were at the low tier for healers, still doing 27s and 28s. So keep all of this in mind, that healer balance used to be horrific back in the day, where certain healers could not do high keys. Dragonflight, all of them can do very high keys. It's just a matter of how easy is it to get into groups and what do you kind of bring to the table. And we're going to talk about that because not only is it a new season with class changes, but there also is a brand new slew of dungeons. My basis for the tier list is going to be not only off of which specs I think can do the highest of keys, but are going to also have the easiest of times with high healing checks, especially early in the season before nerfs come in, which specs are going to fit the best in groups based off of some of the compositional requirements of having battle res, bloodlust, enough kicks, and so on, as well as the dispel profile. And finally, which of the healers I think is going to be a little bit on the lower end or might struggle to be able to find groups or have success sort of building groups based off the utility that is going to be best for this incoming season. So S tier, having the easiest of times finding, building, pugging. A tier, going to be very good, very flexible, but might have some struggles here and there. B tier with the potential to be really high or dropping down into C tier, sort of straddling the breach. And C tier for healers that might have some struggles or might need more specific compositions to really shine or really thrive. To start off our list, S tier, there I think is only one healer that really is going to be at this tier at the moment, and I think it's Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman does a wonderful job with crazy high damage that requires much less GCD work than others. You can pretty much just slap down your acid rain and you're going to be doing a massive slew of damage along the way. Their kick is wonderful, although that is a little bit diminished by Prot Pally sort of dominating the meta. And the Season 2 dungeon's not really requiring as many kicks, especially when you're pugging all the time. It really pays off having a healer with a kick to be watching out for any errant cast going off. Overall healing output's very high, their mana efficiency is great, they don't have a regular poison dispel, they can only dispel magic and curse effects, and there's like 4 dungeons that have poisons throughout, but they did change around the poison dispelling totem in 10.05, which really covers most all of your bases, like 90% of your bases, and if you're running with a Prot Pally, they can pick up the rest of the slack along the way, because for most high key groups, it looks like it's a Prot Pally season coming back again. Otherwise, for the new affixes, in Corporeal, you're going to need to use hard CCs. You've got Hex for it, and again, you can kick it. You have a wonderful healing for Afflicted if you actually needed to heal it. Otherwise, you can just use your regular Dispel. When we tested it on PTR, the Poison Dispelling Totem was dispelling Afflicted. I don't know if they've changed that since, but if it still sticks that way, wonderful. You're going to own it Afflicted. Ghost Wolf, Thunderous Paws, everything is great for entangling. That's never going to be an issue for the spec. And Shaman just kind of brings a bit of everything, which allows it to be very flexible when it comes to groups. You didn't see as many specs that were hard meta that brought Bloodlust for the DPS specs until kind of like later on in the season. So having a healer that was bringing Lust made it so that Shaman and Evoker were doing great. Since we don't exactly know what the DPS meta is going to be, just being able to have a healer that's bringing either a Bloodlust or a Battle Res is always going to be a good thing. So Shaman, S tier. For our A tier, I wanted to put down healers that really bring heavy output, who bring a lot of strong tools to dungeons, but may not necessarily have the whole enchilada when it comes to what you're looking for a flexible healer that's also going to be able to heal high keys in a variety of different comps. Druid, I think, has very solid damage, but it's not going to be a god like you'd see out of like Resto Shaman or Disc Priest or anything along those lines. Bringing a wonderful party buff with versatility, bringing battle res is always going to be great. They don't bring a disease dispel, and you can kind of rely on the Prot Pally, assuming you're running with one, to be able to help out every now and again. There's a few that are really easy, like just like a tank debuff and freehold. It's a disease you need to clear through. Brackenhide has much less diseases than you remember from doing Mythic Zeros at the start of the expansion, but there's still a couple of priority mobs which can put out some really nasty diseases that you would need like an instant dispel on. And so if you're pugging around, you're probably going to have to remind your tanks of that very early on, that there's a couple different mobs that can be extremely, extremely annoying if you don't have a disease spell on hand. So that's something to keep in mind. When it comes to the new affixes, Hibernate for Incorporeal, Shift out of Entangling, and Afflicted is not going to be a problem at all either, because their healing is just super high and wonderful and efficient. So Druid brings a lot of the tools, but I think when you look at which healer is going to be brought to the table, it's also a reflection of what the DPS meta is going to be at the time. Just like we saw Priest, for example, dominate when classes that were going to be getting PI were really in the meta. Druid's really strong for overall dungeons, and they're really flexible for their group. We're just going to have to see if it's going to be the best option, and thus far, I think Shaman's got it beat out just by a little. Evoker, I feel like, is in a very similar position when it comes to Druid, in that their output is wonderful and they have a lot of really powerful tools. Of course, bringing the Raging Dispel, bringing things like Zephyr are really strong party utility. They're going to have no problem with the new affixes, with Sleepwalk for Incorporeal. They can get out of Entangle, no problem. Dual Dispels if they actually needed it for Afflicted. But being able to dispel bleed effects is actually very, very powerful. There's a number of dungeons across the board, both Brackenhide, Uldaman, and a whole bunch of them, that have a lot of bleeds going out in dungeons. So being able to flex into the Bleed Dispel and being able to have the Bleed Dispel reliably on hand for a number of these is incredibly, incredibly helpful. The range issue isn't that big of a deal in most of these dungeons. There's only a couple of them where you kind of spread out a decent amount, but you can kind of force everybody together, so I don't think that's going to be too much of a hindrance for the Evoker. I think a lot of it comes down to losing their old tier set, not getting the instant cast Living Flames, not getting to churn out at quite as much damage as we had seen previously, and then having just almost a pure healing focused tier set for them, where they already really were the bastions of just pumping out loads of healing all the time, no matter what. So when it comes down to it, I think Evoker bringing a lot of different useful but sort of like niche utility does actually really shine in these dungeons. But they're not going to have the turbo high damage that a lot of groups are probably going to be going for at the absolute highest levels. I think Evoker is going to be pretty efficient for pugging at high key levels, but I don't think that you're going to see them in the like high-end world first type comps going in later on the season. Disc, I sort of struggle to be able to properly place, as my experiences with Priest over the years has been when you have a meta built around classes that like PI, Disc or Holy, as we saw in Season 4, can really crazy shine. Disc in particular does obscene amounts of damage, only overshadowed by some like Shaman, for example, but with PI, and with PI on the correct target, it can be the highest damage healer. Your healing efficiency only gets better with your tier set, with more healing out of Radiance. Chance for your procs to be able to give you discounted Radiance is all super insane. Your ability to spam Shackle if you needed to on Incorporeal, if say you double hard crowd control the target, not having a cooldown to Shackle Undead allows you to move it on over to the next target with Incorporeal. Super wonderful. Phantasm, low cooldown fade, super easy for Entangled, and you can always dispel and power word life the Afflicted, and almost every single time it just full heals it without issue. One of the biggest things is that you're sort of, in my experience, because Priest does not bring a battle res, it doesn't bring Bloodlust, it doesn't bring a kick, it doesn't bring a poison dispel, which is also quite big for dungeons like Brackenhide, and as much as it's nice to have your prop pally dispelling poisons, you can't always rely on your tank to be putting out those dispels. And I haven't seen any indication yet that we're going to have a lot of DPS with poison dispels to help fill in the gaps. So that's another thing that might be a little bit difficult to see how Priest could really fit into the meta. But if Lock and Mage are looking good, which last I checked, if Warlock really is, that would be a huge boon for the spec. But if Shadow Priest is also looking strong, then it sort of fills in that power infusion gap. So that's always something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. And that's where I think Disc is at this kind of odd tier where they could be in this upper echelon, but I have a couple concerns going into it without seeing the full meta. Next up at our C tier, these healers, they're all kind of missing a little more than I would like to be brought into really crazy high-end groups, and they're a bit inflexible with what they're bringing to the table. Holy Paladin is always going to have a bit of an overlap with their utility with Prop Pally, as we're assuming that's going to be the dominant tank, as it has been throughout all of 1007. It doesn't look like it's changing now. Unfortunately, kind of the goofy tier set bonus, which doesn't seem to be as effective or as impactful in a dungeon environment as some of the others. The utility for the new dungeons, the Dispel profile is really powerful, having Turn Evil, Freedom, and just good output for Afflicted is going to make all the new affixes a breeze for the spec. That said, it feels like the overall damage that they're bringing and the fact that there's a lot of benefits for more range specs, I think, right now that are quite strong. And there's a number of just like melee unfriendly mechanics coming out into these dungeons. I'm not as hot on Paladin at the moment. And I think it's at this sort of odd tier where, yeah, it can be doing these higher keys, but it seems like it's sort of missing a little bit in the equation overall. Holy Priest, also on a similar tier for Paladins. Their new tier set, while it isn't that great for dungeons, it's actually not too shabby. I was putting together a Prayer of Mending heavy build, and it turns out with a 2-set, you're pretty much constantly refreshing the Prayer of Mendings before they're expiring, and a lot of the dungeons have pretty steady damage for the entire party going out all the time, which actually keeps your Prayer of Mendings bouncing, keeps your healing much more efficient than we saw out of Season 1. There's been a number of buffs to your damage with Burning Vehemence, as well as just running Divine Image, giving you damage and healing all the time, that I'm actually pretty hyped up on Holy Priest. I think it's looking to be in a much better position than we had previously seen out of Season 1, providing a lot more reliable healing and damage along the way. Similar tools as Disc with Shackle Undead, Phantasm, Powered Life for the new affixes that are coming into the mix, which are always going to be very helpful. Like I said before, Holy Priest, Disc Priest, all get a lot better when they're specs that synergize with Power Infusion to the highest degree possible. And so it's very easy to be able to raise Disc and Holy Priest stonks if Warlock or if Mage are in really, really good shape for the next season, which it seems like they should be. But just on their own standing, Holy Priest's downside is also the lack of the Poison Dispel and relying on the tank or relying on somebody else in the group to be able to bring it. I don't think the lack of kick is as big of a deal, but certainly not having Battle Res or Bloodlust, again, like Priest, kind of just puts you at the mercy of whatever else is going on in that group composition, because something might be good in a vacuum, but you have to be able to put it into a working comp. And lastly, we've got Mistweaver. While they have absolutely crazy AoE damage, single target is a bit on the mediocre side. They've got really good tools when it comes to the new affix set with Paralysis. They can heal up and easily dispel Afflicted, of course, and their profile of Poison and Disease dispels is extremely good for the new dungeon setup, because that's what most of the affixes or most of the new dungeons are throwing at you, is poisons and diseases. While they have a lot of really good utility with like AoE stun, a single target kick, as well as Ring of Peace for a lot of the different mob control that's required. Again, not bringing the battle res and not bringing certain party buffs like you would see out of others, where not having just pure versatility, which is always going to be good for everybody. It looks like a lot of magic wielders are really going to be powerful in Season 2, and so you're not going to get quite as much value out of having a physical vulnerability debuff being brought alongside for your team. And so when you're looking at all of the benefits, it's just how is it synergizing with the rest of the team on hand. I do think every healer in that C tier is more than capable of healing very high-end content, but when it comes to how it is sorted relative to everybody else in the group, that's where I think Paladin, Holy, and Mistweaver are all kind of missing just a bit along the way before they get pushed up into the next tier, into the next echelon. Overall, I'm pretty hyped up for healing in M+, and in fact, I'm probably going to be playing my Mistweaver and Shaman quite a bit in addition to my Priest, because regardless of these tier lists, you're always going to be able to heal high-end content if you're a skilled player, and I think that so far, there's a lot of challenging heal checks coming into Dragonflight Season 2, and pretty much all the healers are going to be able to meet that bar for once. It's kind of a weird feeling. If you haven't checked out the Patreon already, we just got it started this month. Big shout out to Cecilio, Thor, Fourth Crow, Corey, Calderon, Kev, Simon, Murrell, and John for getting us started. If you'd like to check it out and support the channel, support the content we have going on, linked in the description down below. Also, be sure to subscribe for more content, as we have a heap of guides coming up, both for dungeons and for various healers, so be sure to check that out as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.